Australia's Labor Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Doranforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. G'day, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast of politics, culture and idea, hosted by myself, Nick Doranforth, head honcho of the JCRC. Welcome to my great mate, Kung Fu Cos Samaras, the Don of Data, the master, the maestro. I feel like I'm introducing Pete Tong on BBC Radio 1, but that was over the weekend. Cos, how are you?
Good. How are you, mate?
Good. Now, you're a bit fired up, and I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of a roundup of recent polling because I think you've got a bee in your bonnet.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of careless, I would say, interpretation of polls and not the best, I would say, input from the industry itself in terms of the way they are treating this very fragmented landscape. It is easily the most challenging environment to run any research program in whatsoever. And so I think, all researchers have got to be really careful about how they compile their data and how they report that. Because, let's just be blunt. We've had polls that in Victoria that shows the One Nation vote of 10% and then the One Nation vote at nearly 30% as the biggest party in the state of Victoria. Well, they can't be all right, can they? Right, and so...
Name names, Cos. Name names.
No, we'll keep it nice and general. But look, the thing is, there is a move. And that move, as we've discussed before, Nick, there is a restructure on the centre-right of politics. There is some bleed that is occurring within the Labor's base, and we can talk about what conditions need to exist for that to happen. It isn't universal. It is not the same as what's going on with the coalition. The size of that shift to One Nation is significant in every state of the country. So it's not just confined to Canberra. Lo and behold, Angus Taylor ain't going to fix the problem that the Liberal Party now faces in South Australia, where they could end up with 0 seats and One Nation actually beating them. Again, flip side, in Victoria, Angus Taylor cannot fix the problem that the Liberal Party is going to face in Victoria as One Nation comes hunting for their seats in regional Victoria in particular, but to a certain extent, obviously, also in other states as well. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that when we are running our research, we've been very methodical. We're taking our time. Newspol's pretty good in that as well. They are approaching it in a very similar way. And I would say that when looking at polls, we have to be very careful about interpreting those polls. Wait for the trend. Don't jump at every single poll and think that it's actually the gospel. Even ours. Watch for the trend in our polling. What does Redbridge and Ascent Researchers polling look like over a period of 6 months, not what it looks like in any given time?
Good advice. The trend is your friend, Cos, is the old motto in politics, yes. Or it ain't your friend. Just wanted to, though, get your sense of, and bearing in mind your caveat there, that it's really early days, I think listeners would be quite keen to know whether there's been any kind of poll bounce for the federal coalition arising out of the change in leadership. Susan Ley, the Liberals' first female leader, has lasted less than a year in the job. She's torn down. We've got Angus Taylor as leader, and a weird scenario where the deputy leader of the Libs is Senator Jane Hume. It ain't going to solve their long-run structural and cultural problems. Let's break it down. No generational change. Angus Taylor and Jane Hume are older Gen X leaders. They were both key figures in the 2025 federal election disaster. I've been paying close attention to Angus Taylor's sort of philosophical pronouncements. It seems to be the stale old ideology. He's talking explicitly about wanting to revive free market economics. There's the same old reversion to culture wars and tough line on national security, out there taking a really strong position on the so-called ISIS brides. Seems to be the same old legacy media tactics, Cozzy. Over the weekend, there was a weekend News Corp sit-down interview with Angus Taylor, sort of expanding on his vision for the coalition and the country. Angus Taylor is also part of the problem for the Libs. It's a real chicken and egg scenario here. He doesn't hold an urban metropolitan seat. He holds what used to be a strictly rural regional seat, and which is now kind of peri-urban, but it's not it's not part of Greater Sydney. The problem is the Liberal Party, Cos.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, you can change leaders as much as you want. As I touched on before, if it was really just about the leadership in Canberra, why do they have a problem in South Australia? Why is it suddenly this is a contagion that's impacting their state branches? Because it actually is a structural problem that they're facing. If the parts of the media want to sit down with a particular Liberal and talk to them about what the future might look like for that party and what are the solutions, I think they need to sit down with Keith Wallahand. I mean, that's the person that I would say, if there was a Liberal that knows how to talk to urban Australia, it's him. We had him in our show last year. He's just recently just published some more of his own views, and it's bang on. Talks about all the problems that they are facing as a political movement, and he offers up some solutions, and those solutions, I feel, will be completely rejected by the current, I would say, leadership team within the coalition.
Why?
Well, the first solution is he offers up is that we need to talk to diverse Australians. Well, I'm sorry, but one of the first things that comes out of your mouth is we need to do something about immigration. Yet again, trying to outflank Pauline Hanson on the right flank, which won't work. I can tell you, most diverse Australians right now are feeling a bit on edge. And no matter what people think about particular ethnic backgrounds of those individuals that I'm talking about, a universal view is they are being targeted and they're really uncomfortable about their political discourse at the moment.
The other problem with Angus Taylor, Cos, is, as I mentioned previously, he's the member for Hume.
Regional seat, yes.
Regional seat. It is sort of encroached upon Greater Sydney, but I'm assuming, you might want to take us through the demographics of Hume, but I'm assuming it doesn't look particularly diverse.
Well, also we can assume that it's a seat that the coalition will worry about losing to One Nation. One Nation's polling in the mid 20s to high 20s, which they are. Then they are polling 35-45% somewhere, and that somewhere is going to be in regional Australia. Hume will be the type of electorate that One Nation will do well in. I'm not saying they'll lose, as in the coalition will lose that seat. It's just that it will have its hands full defending it against One Nation. How they defend seats like that from the right via Pauline Hanson, whilst at the same time trying to talk to a progressive, diverse constituency in our large cities, I don't know how they're going to pull that off.
So the optics are important. Again, having a leader who doesn't represent an urban metropolitan seat, and that also, as I think is where you're getting to, it distorts the kind of mindset which the Liberal Party then reflects back to the electorate, where, if you had a potential leader like Keith Wallahand, he's bringing that outer suburban mindset with a more diverse seat, which looks like modern Australia.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge they've got, I'll give you an example. Barnaby Joyce just announced that, or recently announced that that One Nation's going to advocate for a policy where that if you're a GP and you want to practice in this country, you have to serve in the bush first. Now, look, I think that's a really good idea because there are some significant health problems faced by regional Australians. Lots and lots of doctors just don't go out there. But that's a bit of a trap too, because if the coalition says, yeah, we actually support that too, I can guarantee you there's certain constituencies in our big cities that won't agree with that, because they too have got problems in accessing GPs, right? So out of suburban Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, they've all got problems accessing GPs. So it isn't just a regional problem. But again, It's very smart politics, but it's also good policy because there is an acute health shortage in terms of services in the bush. But there's your wedge, right? How do you get around that? This is the wicked problem the coalition find themselves in.
But there is an opening, cause, like I said, I don't think Angus Taylor is the man. I certainly don't think Senator Hume is the woman. Neither of these two characters are going to be sort of a messianic figure which restores the Liberals to the status that they once had. But there is an opening with One Nation because Pauline Hanson has been out and about talking about on a Sky News interview. Show me one good Muslim. Just incendiary commentary. It's put Barnaby Joyce it's put him in a most uncomfortable position, and that's been playing out on the front pages of the Australian over the past few days. Today they've been up and about talking about GPs. He's been floating a flat sort of 2% tax. There will be greater focus and scrutiny of One Nation across 2026, all the way in the lead up to the next election. It'll be fascinating to see how that dynamic between Barnaby Joyce and Pauline Hanson plays out, because there are quite clearly already tensions there. And he was uncomfortable, but couldn't denounce Hanson for her comments that she made about Muslim Australians. But that is really, I'm not sure I can see that relationship playing out. It's a bit like Mark Latham and Pauline Hanson. When you put two really forceful, egotistical, populist firebrands together, you're playing with fire.
Maybe we'll have to wait and see. I would say that she's at the tail end of her career, and there is a bit of a transition occurring there. Cora Bernardi's obviously joined them. You've got Barnaby Joyce. There's, I think that we've got a bit more to go before we see the full picture of what this One Nation version 2 looks like. But clearly they are now a lot more sophisticated than they've been in the past. We could see that with their policy announcements. We could see that with their ability to fill candidates in every single seat in South Australia. May I add, a feat that the Liberal Party in South Australia could not match. So that's a clear sign. Also, we could see how they vetted their candidates successfully as well. So we are looking at a very different organisation here. We have to be careful in assuming that the past is going to revisit us in 2026 and beyond.
Yes, immense in South Australia. That's going to be a great first up test for not only the South Australian salience of One Nation, but there will be national and federal implications. Generally, people say, there are no national and federal implications. There will be national and federal implications because we're now actually going to, in real time, we're going to see it's going to be One Nation's primary vote intention is going to be tested at a real poll. Peter Malinauskas launched Labor's official campaign yesterday. It's interesting to see, Cozzy, just as an aside, that the old party's still attracted to doing that, the kind of legacy style politics, doing the stand-up campaign launch, which I think Melly did extremely well. Jesus, he's an impressive figure. But I was actually quite interested. I read David Penbo, if you're listening, mate, g'day, from The Australian. He made a really interesting point about Malinauskas and his speech at the campaign launch, that it was really uncharted territory in that Melly wasn't even having to reference the traditional opposition in the Liberal and National parties. His message was really about One Nation.
Yeah, that's right.
We're sort of we are in uncharted
territory. Polling would be telling them that too, right? Yeah. So you'll remember that what's coming out of his mouth at a campaign launch is a manifestation of the intel that he's been provided as leader of that party. So if anyone's wondering what the numbers are looking like on Labor's side in terms of their polling, there you go.
Yeah, right? I do want to turn to Victoria. So let me put you on the spot, Cos. You flagged this earlier. There seems to be a little bit of evidence that One Nation is attracting some of Labor's working class base. You've been big on making the point that the big vote transfer, again, hasn't been tested at a state or federal poll. The big transfer is from Liberal and National voters to One Nation, but there is some emerging evidence that part of Labor's working class base is potentially attracted to One Nation. Where is that? Where does that sit right at this point in late February 2026?
Yeah. Before we go on, so it's important to acknowledge that when you look at a primary vote, for example, Labor at the moment nationally is on about 34 in our numbers.
Yeah, hasn't really changed much.
But underneath the sheet ice, there's always movement between parties, right? And it's micro, it's significant, or it's minor, whatever it is. That 34 is more of a manifestation of what's going on under the sheet ice than actually the vote not moving. So there's always some votes going somewhere between Labor and One Nation, Labor and the coalition, back and forth and so on. That always happens. But where we will see Labor lose votes to One Nation will be in states where the brand is not travelling well and the electorate is frustrated. That's not South Australia.
Victoria?
It's Victoria, right? And so we will see, unless something drastically changes, a shift of some, not all. It's very geographically specific, very, very specific to a particular demography. It's not like the coalition. It ain't universal. It's in certain areas. So in Melbourne's case, it's in places like Melton. It's in other Western suburban seats where there are second and third generation migrants. So these are people like you and I, Nick, who were born here, but born to diverse parents. These individuals are more likely to be voting One Nation, right?
Yeah, well, there's a One Nation candidate, Victoria Cozzi, who was Miss Italia.
And yeah, that's right. And that's a really, really good example of what the One Nation base looks like. It isn't just these white folk. There is some diversity about it. Now, these individuals I'm talking about were probably voting Liberal in the past, but there is an element of them that were voting Labor. And so there will be some of that movement. That occurs, as I touched on before, when the Labor brand's not travelling well. If it's travelling well and these voters are happy with that Labor brand, they vote Labor. So think of South Australia, think of Chris Minns in New South Wales. So, I expect the Labor primary up there to be still quite healthy. But in Victoria, we're going to see a situation where both major parties are going to suffer attrition to One Nation. We are not sure yet what that full picture is going to look like. We're coming up with some polling in the next week or so through the financial review. Again, that will be a snapshot in time. I'd like to see what those numbers look like in 6 months' time and how entrenched that pattern is, how entrenched that trend is.
Just let me push you about your thesis that it depends on how brand Labor is travelling. What is causing damage or lack thereof to brand Labor, and thinking specifically about Victoria? Is it the economy? Is it cultural issues? Is it law and order and crime? What are you picking up which is causing damage to brand Labor? And I know you want to turn to the CFMEU, but we'll not quite yet. We're not ready yet, Cos. But what are you picking up which is damaging brand Labor in Victoria?
So I was looking at some stats last week and around the socioeconomic health of particular communities around Melbourne and Victoria, and this analysis that I put together goes all the way back to 2014 when Labor was elected under Dan Andrews. In particular parts of Melbourne, specific parts of Melbourne, and obviously parts of regional Victoria, living standards have declined under the Labor government. People have become poorer under the Labor government in these Labor constituencies that were once looked upon as safe Labor seats. This is a manifestation that has nothing to do with the current Premier. It's the previous administration. I'm not going to sit there and be critical of them, which is only to state the facts that Labor has been guilty, and it isn't just in Victoria, I would say everywhere, of over-focusing on marginal seats in terms of services and critical infrastructure, guilty in overdoing it there and completely ignoring the working class people that put them there in the first place as a political movement in this country.
Yeah.
And it's not just Victoria, it's everywhere, right? But it's writ large here in Victoria. And the chickens are coming home to roost.
Yeah, it's a global pattern, Cosy. It's a global pattern. It's a global pattern.
Correct.
You know, we obviously had Alistair Campbell on the pod last week. Yes. What a wonderful chat. We didn't tease him too much about or tackle him too much about New Labor, but one statistic from the New Labor years is it's the same pattern happened. There's one amazing statistic. New Labor, UK Labor, they lost 10 million working class voters. Yes. In between 1997 and 2010, 10 million.
That's right.
Largely working class Britain. Well, we've seen the same thing in America with the Dems. And yeah, you're right. We are seeing it.
If you're going to gold plate middle class suburbs of Melbourne and ignore working class suburbs of Melbourne, well, guess what's going to happen? Right? Sooner or later, they're going to go, you know what? We're done. You don't represent us. Now, to be fair, when we speak to them, we say, well, what about the other mob, the coalition? They laugh. They say, oh, they're worse. So hence, we'll get a port.
They've now got a third option, Cosy. They've now got a third option. And then there was a really good read again over the weekend in Nine Media, The Age, Chip Legrand. Or should I say, I don't know whether you pronounce it Chip Legrand. He talked about, he was looking at the Resolve data, and it said, it was a good headline actually. It said, the Resolve poll shows that no party can win the next election, but one has to. One has to. So fast forwarding to November, what are you seeing playing out in November of this year at the state poll?
Based on numbers that we're seeing, and I've got to put that caveat around all the other polls that have come out, and ours is going to come out, it's going to be in that, roughly in that space. I can't see the two major parties getting to 45 at the moment.
Really?
What that configuration at the moment, what that configuration looks like, I don't know. Can the coalition pick up 16 seats? No, because they're going to be getting eaten by One Nation as well on their right flank, and they're not travelling as well in middle class urban Melbourne, where Labor is actually quite strong, right? So it's going to be a really, really complicated election. 88 by-elections is probably the better term we could use, right? It's a three-way contest right across the board. And it's going to be very, very challenging for both sides in managing the demands, not only from a campaign perspective, but in a fragmented communication environment, and of course meeting the demands of their caucus, who are going to be obviously not used to this new paradigm.
But what does it actually look like on November the 26th, Cos? Like, what would that mean? So we had the vote. No one gets to 45 seats, the magical 45 out of 88, so a majority. Does that mean that Labor would have to form some kind of coalition government with the Greens? What would it look like on the flip side?
Yeah, correct. It's a matter of how much, let's say that we see that particular scenario emerge in November. We've got a long way to go before we get there. And you and I will be talking about this all year. But let's say that scenario does prevail. Both majors cannot get to 45. Then we start going around, okay, where is Labor going to hold its seats? It's going to hold its seats in middle urban Melbourne. You know, your seats, which historically have been quite marginal, are becoming more and more advantageous for them, right? So I'm confident that they'll do well there. Where Labor will get into trouble is in the outer suburbs.
You're thinking Melton, Werribee.
Yeah, it's sort of. That's a more of a One Nation problem. But with the Liberal Party, it will be in Pakenham, it will be in Bass, it will be in Ringwood.
I was going to ask you about the Frankston line. How's the Frankston line looking?
Yeah, that's looking pretty good because that's been gold plated. Right, so that's if you want to live in a part of Melbourne. Shout out to anyone who's thinking of moving to Melbourne. Go and live up and down the Frankston line. It is absolutely chockers with infrastructure. They've done a really, really good job of sandbagging that part of the world. If I was on the Labor side of politics right now running their campaign, I'd be less concerned about that particular political territory. and more concerned about emerging problems, right? So, yes, those outer eastern electorates I just mentioned, they should be lost to the Liberal Party. Just normal attrition, right? They're on bugger all margins. Probably shouldn't have won them in 2022. Should get washed away pretty quickly. Maybe now, because we're not sure what One Nation does to the Liberal primary in those seats, whether they pick them up, whether the Liberal Party picks them up, or whether the split within the Conservative side of politics is so great that Labor capitalises on it and holds on one or two of them. We don't know that yet, right? That's one scenario. Go over to the other side of Melbourne, you've got all sorts of wreckage occurring that we touched on with One Nation. And then, of course, then the bush. Do independents get elected in some seats? How many seats does One Nation take off the National Party or the Liberal Party? We don't know yet. But it's going to be a dog's breakfast.
Yeah, lots of fun for you, Cozzy, devouring the data.
Oh, picnic.
Yes, all your Christmases have come at once. One issue which has been playing out and the so-called legacy media, I shouldn't bash the legacy media so much because I get
we're part of the legacy media, Nick.
Well, that's right. And one of my occupations is a columnist for the Australian. So
that's right. Correct.
Just an apology to the Australian, and I should almost offer an apology for there's a little bit of News Corp bashing on last week's pod, not by me. But one thing which is being appearing in legacy media, and not necessarily, actually not so much News Corp, but Nine Media have gone to town on the CFMEU issue. Now, you've got to be in your bonnet about this. Your sense, I think, is that legacy media has made it a massive issue. Nine Media running countless stories, editorializing on this, but the public sees it as very much an intra-elite squabble, a dispute in which they have no real say or not a great amount of care.
Most issues of corruption and alleged corruption, not specific to this issue, are seen by the public as intra-elite issues. What I mean by that is you all do it. You're all up to your neck in it. Don't try to, tell me that the blue side or the red side is more pure. So what I'm trying to say here is it is probably a part of the broader sentiment within the Australian public that they've lost confidence in institutions.
They're all rotten. Yep.
That's right. Correct. Right. That's what I'm trying to say here. It's not necessarily that the issue doesn't have merit that shouldn't be covered. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that don't think it's going to permeate through the electorate like it should. Does it take off the table Labor's ability to talk about its number one political asset, infrastructure in Melbourne? The answer is 100%. It's a big problem, big political problem.
A vote switcher?
Not really. I think the vote switching is
going back. I mean, you've been making this big point about the blocks.
That's right.
And the sorting between left, right blocks.
Right. Yeah, you're going to get a lot more fragmentation of Labor's base to its flanks. Does this contribute to it? Look, it contributes to the overall noise. And the noise is they're not in control, the budget's in trouble. As we touched on earlier, for some Victorians, personal economic wealth has declined. You have an inflationary crisis underway. It just puts more wood onto the fire being overall pessimism. And it isn't just in Victoria, it's right across the country, but it's particularly acute here. Then, of course, as you and I touched on in a previous podcast, throw into that fire PTSD from the pandemic, and you've got just lots and lots of bad stuff out there politically from the Labor side's perspective that can no longer control and may have an impact on them.
Just going back to the CFMEU issue, I'd be interested in your take as to how perceptions play out in the electorate in terms of gender. Do men look at that issue and the prominence that outlets like Nine give it from a different lens to women? Also, I'd be very interested in your take on obviously, someone from working class background, bearing in mind that we're going to bash this into people's head. The stereotype of the working class person being, the plumber or the tradie or the That's not right. It's people that work in the care economy, retail, logistics. Okay, but
That's right.
how are people from different socioeconomic class backgrounds? How are they perceiving the issue in addition to men and women?
So the group that's more likely to just agree that this is just another, as I touched on, wood onto the fire are men, Gen X men. They are, if you want to find the two groups of Australians, so it isn't just Victoria, but Australians who are almost diametrically opposed ideologically in this country right now, it's Gen X men who are right on the fringe of the populace right now, in terms of the psychological testing that we're doing, and Gen Z women, the most progressive constituency in the country. Gen X women are more likely to not bite down hard on this issue and vote on issues that are more important to them. With social cohesion is one of them. Services, things that really matter to their community. So there is definitely a gender divide. It's usually much older men who are going to bite down hard on this issue. And look, I'll argue, Nick, that they've already probably gone in polling. But from a polling perspective, they're not sitting on Labor's poll now. They're sitting on One Nation, or they're sitting on something else.
Tell us about the Gen Z, and what do you mean by progressive? It's a sort of, I hate the term, as you know, Cos. What do you mean by when you describe Gen Z women and which is your thoughts on Gen Z men? When you describe them as sort of uber progressive, what are you talking about specifically?
The most likely to, so the greatest number of Australians, from a particular generation who we identify as finding economic populism the most appealing. So they will blame the big end of town, corporates, institutions for intergenerational inequality. They will not blame minorities. The group that is most likely to bite down on that doctrine, as I touched on, is Gen Z women. Gen Z men are slightly off to the centre, but still in that space. So they're still a very progressive, left-wing, economic populist cohort, but they do have some elements of right-wing populism in their personality makeup, but still bolted down to the left side of politics. We can move across the generations. Millennial women are much further left than Gen Z men, right? And millennial men are much further left than Gen X men. And is there any evidence those millennial men are moving in the same trajectory as the Gen X men? No, we're not seeing that. And so there's your difference again. So it's complex, but you could see that there's clearly a gender divide.
Can you explain the gender divide?
Yeah,
why are they more attracted to what you call left-wing populism? Once upon a time, Cosy would have said they're more attracted to socialism or social democracy.
Yeah, well, I would say if you were going to speak, you're going to look at a group of Australians who are
Australians don't talk about social democracy.
Yeah, who are feeling the full brunt of whether it's the inflationary crisis, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's all the instability in our society. It's women, and they are more likely to be very attentive to the institutions that are letting down them, their families, their friends, and their loved ones. That's their psychological reaction to this problem, and it's a left-wing one.
So potentially good signs for the left side of politics, but how does that play out in a party political sense, Cos? Because as you said, they're then sorting themselves amongst Labor and the Greens, and also there's that interesting question of where do the teal independents sit? Because I think they're more kind of centre-right on economics, questions of fiscal policy, fiscal discipline, but quite clearly on social and cultural issues and gender issues, then they're splitting off to the left.
We look at the One Nation vote right now, and the women that are voting for, or are reporting to us and other pollsters that they're plan to vote for One Nation, they're most likely proportionally to reject the racial stuff. So if I was to say that Pauline Hanson's comments that all Muslims are bad, yet it's probably damaging for them amongst women. And so they're more likely to go back to the political parties they were voting for. More so if they are former Labor voters.
Yep.
But I wouldn't rule out the coalition picking them up if the coalition does not embark down the same trajectory, which, let's be frank, that's a big call.
It's raised another fascinating question, Cos. Something you and I are about where, as part of my long-term sort of research, the research of the John Curtin Research Centre, funny the Research Centre carries out research, we're about to embark on some really interesting, and I think never done before, research into faith and religion amongst young Aussies, particularly Gen Z and millennials. I'm really interested when Pauline Hanson comes out and makes those incendiary comments that you did as regards Muslim Australians, basically saying there's something suspect about them, that they're not, fully or properly Australian, because that's what when you boil it all down, you cut out the crap, cause that's what she's saying, that they're not properly Australian. There's something suspect about them. I'm really interested, cause, as to how does that play out? Because does that obviously they're not voting for one nation, but then is that also acting to sort of, does that push? So you're obviously saying that's pushing women generally across those demographics. What does it do for, say, the and I don't want to talk about the Islamic Muslim vote as being a block vote. It's heterogeneous. Does that I would assume is pushing them towards the left pile, a bit like the way that we've talked about this before. For much of the 20th century, it was the anti-Catholic sectarianism of the mainly Protestant, anti-Labor, non-Labor parties, Liberal Party, the United Australia Party, whatever their name, that pushed Catholic, mainly Irish Australian Catholics from that background towards the Labor Party. And they weren't necessarily natural Labor voters, or many of them weren't, but they were pushed. I'm interested to see how that sort of push-pull factor plays out in this particular context.
Yeah, I would say that most diverse Australians now, irrespective of whether they are a target of this language, whether it's coming from Pauline Hanson or whether it's been touched on by the coalition, are being pushed towards left-wing parties. I will not rule out that what they saw in 2025 writ large in those big urban diverse electorates, it was just a start. I think the conversations that we're having with Australians at the moment from diverse backgrounds gives us a very clear indication that they are not happy. It's quite, I would say, alarming, the levels of anger that is brewing towards politicians who have decided to use their diversity as a political weapon. So I think, yes, okay, the coalition's losing votes to One Nation, but I think it's in for a rude shock in whatever's left of their urban vote.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the most you did focus groups for us, Cos, before and then immediately after the federal election, and we discussed this in a private briefing last week. One of the most striking lines from those focus groups was there are a number of Indian Australians in one of the groups, and one of the young fellas said he was attracted to the coalition's economic policies, and he literally said, if I was being completely rational about this, I would vote for the coalition. But then there's a line there in your summary from the groups which just stops you dead in your tracks, and he says, I can't vote for them because they don't like people like me.
You nailed it. You saw the research, right? That's exactly what we hear. It's exactly how they feel.
And that's that push. That's that push. And I'm there again. It's like the idea that, Muslim Australia, again, not a homogenous block, heterogeneous. They are being pushed away for potentially generations from brand Liberal, from brand Coalition, when they are not necessarily natural Labor voters. They're
Correct.
certainly not natural Greens voters, but
Well,
they're being pushed away. And so history is rhyming here, Cos. History is rhyming.
That's right. I mean, we saw where the old world was with regards to the Chinese diaspora. You know, the Liberal Party won Chisholm, you know, and has subsequently lost that seat, and the likelihood of them winning back is remote because of exactly what you and I are talking about. There was once upon a time where these communities, these large diasporas that were coming to this country, were actually going to supercharge the Liberal Party's primary vote. Yeah, you know, at the early 2000s when John Howard flipped the
He held
migration.
Bennelong. He held the seat of Bennelong.
That's right. Well, he flipped it and he went from family reunion to skilled migration and then brought these two large diasporas to this country. It was actually John Howard that did it. Those of us who were involved in campaigning on the Labor side of politics thought, oh, boy, this is going to hurt Labor. No one ever anticipated that the children of the Howard era, politicians that followed him, were going to mess this up so badly.
Well, that's a bit like, well, again, so I just said history rhymes. Who would have thought that the baby boomers, the children of the silent generation, would in the late 1960s and early 70s, at that point, disrupt the political system by rebelling against their elders and starting to vote for Labor, starting to vote for the Democrats, then starting to vote for the Greens and others. So that kind of generational rebellion is not a new thing, is it, Cos?
No, and look at just on Burmans. I mean, there's still roughly around 25-30% to vote for the left side of politics. So although a very significant chunk of them are very conservative these days, there's still a chunk of them that still vote Labor. And I may say that One Nation now outpolls the Liberal Party and the coalition amongst baby boomers in this country.
Really?
By a significant margin. So the support for the coalition amongst Burmans is probably in the teens now. And
it's incredible because they buttressed the Howard era. Right. They buttressed the Howard era.
This is the full problem that the coalition's facing, and that is this Praetorian Guard has basically switched sides.
It's fascinating, Kung Fu Cos Samaras. I look forward to your insights as we deep dive into the South Australian state election. What's the date of that, Cos? It is March.
Last weekend of March.
We'll talk about the South Australian campaign on our next episode, and people are probably going to be sick of us talking about the Victorian state election, which is coming up in late November 2026. Cos, thank you very much. Thank you, listeners. Don't forget, you're probably checking us out on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, but be generous. Be a mate, be a good comrade, refer a mate. But until now, it's Auf Wiedersehen, ciao, arrivederci.